Oh, Janice, if you wouldn't mind calling us to order, I'm happy to take over
Okay.
in leading us through the conversation, but I'll have you
Okay.
call us to order, please.
All right. I would like to call to order the ad hoc committee of the Metro Human Relations Commission meeting to discuss recommendations for community engagement regarding police reform and the hiring of a new police chief, Tuesday, August 11th at 3 p.m. Thank you. And I'd like to turn over to the meeting to Mel Fowler-Brooks, Executive Director. And I think first order of business, though, will be the approval to conduct the meeting by electronic means.
Yes, I move that the items on the meeting agenda constitute essential business of the board. Meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans, considering the COVID-19 outbreak and any rule that conflicts with the governor's Executive Order 16 permitting electronic meetings be suspended.
Great. Is there a
Call for a
second?
motion? Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Motion carried. Thank you. Now we turn the meeting over to Mel Fowler-Brooks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Green.
Mel Fowler Green. I know we've worked together for years. But I have COVID brain. You might have COVID brain.
My apologies, Mel.
I don't. It's fine. I've been called much worse, Janice. So thank you guys for making the time, and especially so soon after our meeting. You know, we got this together relatively quickly. And as you will recall, and for the benefit of our guest, Chair Davis, the Metro Human Relations Commission voted last Monday to create this ad hoc committee to put together recommendations for community engagement around police reform and the process by which the city is going to hire its new police chief or its new public safety department head, or whatever that we end up advocating. And I know, and I won't speak for your board, Ashley, but our board expressed real interest in doing that work in collaboration with your board, the Community Oversight Board. So if you want to just give us a quick update on what happened at your meeting on Tuesday, then we can sort of align our conversation around logistics.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you so much. I've got to make sure, I don't know if I said this on the record yet or not, but thank you so much for the invitation to join you. Many of your names I'm familiar with, the essence and purpose of your space. I'm intimate. Someone is fight with you, but Mel is quickly going to be a good friend. I see, of course, Mr. Tucker, that we don't like to hold a meeting unless we see his face or hear his voice. So good to see you also, sir, as well, but other good friends here too. I will just offer a very brief overview of what we discussed yesterday during our executive committee meeting and kind of the genesis of that conversation. Last week, probably Tuesday of last week to be exact, sharing with them a proposal for a 3-part community forum series. And I detailed out for them a very rough sketch of certain constituency groups that, at least on our side of the space, we found to be marginalized and in need of intentional engagement and needing their voices to be uplifted. I'm happy to share more details of that, but I did share that with Mel so she can walk us through that as she thinks is most appropriate. What's important to note, though, is that the executive committee there were certain groups that were left off of that and they needed to be uplifted. And so we voted to, if necessary, add in a fourth community forum to ensure that advocates and those associated with domestic violence, mental health, advocates in that space also had an intentional forum to be heard as it relates to what they want to see in their next leader of our police space. And then we also said that we wanted to be intentional around collaborating with MHRC. And so we felt without a doubt, if there's any space where our two entities should be engaged and aligned for the good of the cause here for this community, this is a perfect space for it. And so we have the full support of our executive committee. The board is in support and also aware of this this endeavor. They don't know the details specifically of our MHRC engagement. We really all the ornaments on the tree and then show up to the party, but we are excited to engage. So I'll go to mute here, but I do want to acknowledge, I believe our executive director, Ms. Fitchard, has joined us. Director Fitchard, are you here too as well? Yes. Okay, perfect. Welcome as well. So I was just giving an overview of our meeting yesterday, but I'll go mute here, and Mel, you can certainly let me know if it's helpful to run through the 4 community groups that we had in mind too.
Well, great. I'm happy to go over some of what you sent me, and I did share this with committee members earlier, but for the sake of transparency and for the public, I think it would be best to state it in our meeting. So the rough outline that the Chair Davis has put forward was 3 potential community forums with 3 different, focus groups, so to speak. The first being Hispanic, youth, LGBT, immigrant community. I would also add refugee community to that. The second one, the African American or Black community, faith leaders and senior citizens. And the third forum, formerly incarcerated and folks who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. And then my understanding from what you just said, there was some discussion about the possibility of a 4th for telling.
I'm sorry, Mel, you cut off for me. Did you detail the 4th?
Yeah, sorry. Would you remind me what which communities you all thought might be left out of that list for a possible 4th forum?
Absolutely. Yeah, the 4th, we had in mind survivors and advocates in the human trafficking, domestic violence, mental health, and victim rights communities.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm interested in hearing from the MHRC folks. Really, we had no parameters laid out in our meeting on Monday. We didn't have logistics, right? We too aren't showing up with all the ornaments on the tree. I don't even know if our tree hadn't even been done growing yet. But I think that if hear from some of our committee members, their thoughts on, first of all, just this proposal as a general matter, and then we can also then talk about logistics and what that would look like, and possibly how we can sort of divide responsibility and work together on getting it done. So don't make me call on you.
I'll chime in real quick.
Please
with,
do.
I think Davey will probably expand more. Janice, the main thing, and I love how you said about splitting responsibilities and stuff. The main thing that comes to mind is as the mayor's office takes on their own whatever process with this, the concern is that one, like what the documentation is going to be like of those people that are whatever on the community board or advising the mayor's office or the process, if they express any kind of discontent or criticism or concern, how will that be dealt with, and how can we protect that expression and sort of maybe document it and make sure it's out there in the world, so that if by any chance this all gets fast tracked and suddenly we have a police chief and we don't really know how it all happened, we know that there was a process and there was voices were expressed and concerns were expressed, and that they can't be lost in the fold in a way. And the second thing that came up for me, at least, so one is just like make sure we do the process that we want and we document what happens there, and ideally we share that publicly, so it's known, and so there's pressure to address these issues regardless if someone is fast tracked in or whatever. And the second one is just what does success look like for community members after the police chief is in place, and documenting that, and also having that very publicly known, as in I think of media. So those are the two main things that come up initially in my mind, just so we can have ownership and control over the process if it's not exactly being done, if boxes are just being checked by the mayor's office.
I think, can I just speak very quickly to that? Something I forgot to add now. Points I failed to share that in the proposal, the original email I shared out, I was also including the need for a report to be sent out, a public report that synthesizes all of the comments that we received, and hopefully, if it's possible, and I realize I've chatted with our executive director about this, I'd like for it to be specific about what the communities are. Our refugee community specific issues. I think we need to be intentional about stating that as such, and not just in a general form. And that would take both MNCO and MHRC leadership and staff working together, and we're looking at ways that we could feasibly share that load. And then the other component of this is to coordinate the date and time of this with the mayor. This forms take, and putting that intentionally on their calendars so that they are listening in, not to give them a mic to speak. I don't think that is what we had in mind, but to ensure that they are hearing firsthand from the community too. But those are two things we spoke about yesterday too. And I know, Director, if you think of anything else.
Well, and let me add to that, Ashley. I really appreciate what you're saying about being as intentional as we can and documenting demographic information about community and community members. The survey that the mayor's office is currently doing through Hub Nashville, all of the responses are publicly available on the Nashville's open data portal. I did send a question to the office. I haven't received a response, but my question was, are they collecting demographic information from the people who are submitting these responses that we just can't see, or are they just not collecting demographic information from respondents? And I'm sure the members of my commission are probably tired of hearing me say this, but you can't really do equity work or equity analyses if you don't collect some kind of demographic information or demographic data. So I'm really, and what I do see they're collecting, but I just don't, I think zip code is a very poor proxy for deeper demographic information, and including, of course, age. And given the gentrifying nature of many of our neighborhoods, now zip codes really are hard to use as a proxy. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to ensure that, to the best of our abilities, we are collecting this data really cognizant of demographic differences and demographic information to do some equity analysis.
Yeah, hi, Mel. I had a conversation with Bunton today, and I asked him how the survey was going. They're not collecting demographic information. He did mention that to me as I was asking him how, he was going to get that information out to the public. And so, and so his conversation was very brief on that, but he did mention, I asked him something similar about what he was collecting. And he did mention that they weren't collecting that information that you were just talking about. So just to bring that up. So.
A couple of questions, I guess. As I'm looking on this community forum piece that I think came from the COB, and you have the three groups and the way that they're broke down. And then I heard what you said about adding the fourth group. While I'm totally 100% agreement that those marginalized communities need to be heard from, why would we not include just general, just a general population also, so that it would be representative of Nashville? While yes, I think we need to hear from them, I shared with John Button my concern about the survey and the digital divide that exists between some marginalized folk anyway, which was, and then he says, well, they can dial 311 and do a verbal. Yeah, but you've not hyped that up as much. You've not made that a significant portion of what you're talking about please take this survey. And so I say that just to say, I'm good with all this, but why would we not want to hear not only from these, but to hear from the population as a whole, so that the document that you present would be representative in some form or fashion of our collective outreach to Nashville about what they want and achieve. Because if not, it seems like we are excluding a significant demographic of our community also, which could easily be thrown back at us in a boomerang type backlash kind of thing, which other folk could take and make something out of it where it doesn't need to be anything made out of it.
But couldn't we argue that we're not trying to duplicate efforts and we're doing what is not being done in a way? Like that wasn't, we're not trying to do an exact process that mayor's office is doing. We're trying to fill in what they're not doing. That's one argument that comes to mind. And the second thing is, are we asking the same questions that the mayor's office is asking? Because that could also say, we're doing something different.
Well, I guess, again, the reason I said it was that not only am I sure that these folk need to have their voices counted, but I'd also like to hear what regular white Nashvillians have to say too about what they want to achieve, because I think that's important. That if we're going to do that, it seems to me that we are excluding a group, and that's just my concern. That's why I brought that up. So I'll hear what you all have to say.
One of the things that I want to say is, and Ashley, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I was under the impression that this was going to be more so a fluid type of um, comment, getting commentary from the community, and not necessarily led by specific questions. And so, if that's not what's happening, then then I think that we need to talk about that, because I wasn't sure that we were going to leave them with basically a Q&A, but more so have them, what you and I discussed, I thought was more so we would give them the opportunity to discuss what they wanted in a more, organic fashion.
Yep, no, Dr. Fisher, you're absolutely right. And in fact, Mel, I think you said you shared the email, the original email, but I think I'd broken it up into, I don't know, I think it was like hearing from 6 people fluidly, kind of back to back, taking a 10 or 15 minute, and then hearing from 6 or 8 more. And I don't know how I broke it up, but so that it filled the time of like 90 minutes to 2 hours or something like that. But I didn't have in mind that anything structured other than allowing people to sound off about the skills, the background, how they would reimagine this position and think about this creatively. And I take Mr. Tucker's point. I also, and I didn't catch who I spoke, the board members spoke directly thereafter, but I think there has to be thought about, we want to be intentionally here because certain are not invited to be heard here. But also we don't want to give anyone a breadcrumb to assume that we're not listening to all voices. And so I wonder if there's a way to be intentional around the way we share this out, like the communication that's shared out. And I'm not saying I have the answer here, but I do want to ensure that we are intentionally reaching out to organizations that are, on the ground engaging with marginalized communities. I don't see any other way their voice is going to get to the table. And our intentional acts here cause the mayor's office a good need to slow down and wait till these voices are heard. I think it's worthwhile. So, but I
So we could, not speaking to the question of, how much, like how many guardrails or, we're going to put on, the comments that people can make. But what we could, just throwing an idea out, that none of the meetings are closed off to anybody in the public who wants to speak, but we can be clear that, this evening we're going to hear from community with a focus on whatever communities, because we are partnering with organizations that work within those particular communities. So it doesn't mean that that's exclusively all we're going to hear from that evening. Does that make sense? Does that answer your issue, Commissioner Tucker?
Yes, to some degree. And I'm just wondering in my mind, I'm just trying to figure this out. Okay, so one night, and this will be done on WebEx or something, I'm sure. And then so you got the tagline that tonight, the community forum, we want Hispanics, youth, LGBTQ, and immigrant community. Next time you want the African American / Black faith leaders, senior citizens. Next time you want formerly incarcerated, homeless, and then I think I heard you actually say the next time we want, I think victims of domestic violence or whatever. But nowhere in there do we say, as the Human Relations Commission and the Civilian Oversight Board, is there a call for just Nashvillians in general? Yes, we can have special emphasis toward this, but I don't know. I just see this coming from 2 governmental agencies as being exclusive. And the flack or the side railing or the gaslighting that could come from a couple areas that I know that are monitoring this process very, very heavily, just waiting for moments to really enter in. I think this might be one of those that criticism, while I agree it would be unfair, we're trying to bring voices to the table that normally don't come to the table. I got that. Is there a way that we can bring these voices to the table without sounding as if we don't want to hear from white voices?
Well, I think that, I mean, when we start talking about the Community Oversight Board, right? So we represent the community, and of course, in the community is all kind of people, including police officers, right? Because I mean, we might want to hear from them and see what they want in their next police chief. I don't think that many will bravely come forward in a public forum and say what they want, but they should have that opportunity. And maybe we can leave some room out in one of the sessions and carve out time and say, you know, and instead of just naming a group, say this is open for all members of the community to join in to express, you know, what it is that they want to express. So I think that if we're having 4 sessions, out of those 4 sessions, we could carve in, you know, a 30-minute slot for those people to be a part of it and be included without necessarily putting them in a particular box.
Another option might be, and I don't mean to say this like it's covert, right? But it's open to the public, right? But if, you know, evening 1, we have already done our homework and partnered with organizations that represent and work deeply with communities that we want to target, right? Then we're not putting a limit on who can speak, but if we have done our homework, then the organizations that we're partnering with will have gotten a significant interest from their constituencies. Does that make sense?
And I was just going to say, and so how does that address the more inclusive nature? I was just a little bit confused.
Yeah.
Meaning that we're not really gonna, you know, we don't have to put a label on, you know, tonight we only want to hear from people who fit into X demographics, right? That's not what we're doing. But we can be intentional in outreach and partnership in order to ensure that, you know, that certain demographics are.
Mel, you froze up on my end.
And I guess my comments are only based on anticipation of what could be problematic. That even now, there's this, from the sense I get, a push to promote Drake. And the one thing I hear from individuals who bring that up to me is, well, he's Black. You know, and that comes from an angle of that I think is part of what I would hope our work would not do, is be part of that polarization that I already see that's starting to happen, when we already know that just because we get a Black person as a chief, that means that they're going to deal with the interests of those marginalized people in any real, equitable, justice-minded type way. We've already been there, done that. But I don't know, I would just not want us to get caught up in having to defend ourselves against what was not the intent from the beginning. I've never took this as an intent to exclude anyone, but when you have 2 metro organizations that are making these public announcements, and you're saying, I want this, this, and this tonight, this, and this the next night, this, and this the night after that. Well, where's my night? You know, well, where is my night? Which would be a legitimate question. Which means then, Ashley, you or Jill's gonna have to start explaining that we wanted unheard voices brought to the table. Maybe if we did do the backdoor work of making sure that the community partners and those various organizations that represent these particular demographics would be a part of these events.
May I?
Yes, please. Follow you. Sorry.
I want to.
No, I'm done. I don't want to perseverate.
I had one thought, if I may.
Yeah, go, Janice, go.
Okay, thanks. With instead of perhaps targeting different groups, what about it's arranged on different issues? And then anybody who has a perspective to bring when thinking about immigrant issues, the Hispanic community, because that cuts a wider swath, for example, than perhaps, when we're saying we're bringing these groups and letting them have a voice. Well, obviously, if your issue, my issues are obviously with the immigrant community, and from what I do with language services, et cetera, I have an interest where it might not necessarily look like, from just my appearance that I would. So perhaps, that might be a way to, to promote a more inclusive, while at the same time inviting and making sure that the word is, out there to those interest groups.
Commissioner Rodriguez, I think that's an excellent option here to focus on issues. I'd be remiss if I just DA practitioner 30 seconds. Look, there's a reason why we're talking about this in this way, because when look, no one's saying that we need a heterosexual night to talk about the rights and voices of straight people, because we know they are not marginalized in that way. And we have to be very honest with ourselves about why we need intentional focus here, right? Whether it is driving while Black or realizing the incarceration, the affliction of our refugee and immigrant community. So just from the COB, I can just say community perspective, we would be comfortable explaining why we're being intentional here, because there's a need. But that also means also with faith leaders and business community members. There's race in all spaces of that. So when I think of faith leaders, I think of every single race there is. And I would think that people would be engaged in that same way. The same with the immigrant community. But I do like the idea of just making it about the issues. And that's just, and naturally the advocates and community members will flow from that. And perhaps it's community conversation number one. And that is all, or how, let's make it much more pretty than how I've named it. The first 3-part series, but then we are being intentional to Mel's point about how we engage. But I also, I feel really as if, we don't need to have a forum for those that have not been impacted by domestic violence. Why? Because they are not impacted in the same way. So let us not shy away from also this space of race, even though it is a hotly contested discussion right now. Now more than ever, I think we have to talk about race intentionally. I just think.
Fully in alignment, Ashley. That's exactly the vibe. That was what I was concerned about, is that, I know exactly, Davey, what you're concerned about is the blowback and the backlash, but the moment we're allowed to say we are highlighting these people because they are not being highlighted, because they're being disenfranchised or marginalized by this process. And I think we're the people that can do that. We can protect and provide a forum for this so that they can do that. And Janice's idea is great, because if we did a human trafficking night, and what right person that's been affected by and if we do an immigrants, what we mean by immigrants issues or immigrants rights or housing issues, we probably
So I have a question, because it seems like as we're talking about issues, I think that it can be, oh, did I cut someone off?
Miriam, we lost you.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, is it bad? Bad? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Fisher.
You're back. Go ahead, Miriam. No, you can finish. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, so the last remaining thing that came up for me in terms of just backdooring this, in terms of like making sure the community leaders are there, I'm fine with that, and I think that's great. But I also do like the idea of an open forum where even someone we don't know of as a community leader, someone we don't know but that has just heard about this and feels very passionate about it, can show up and speak, even if they're not in the circles of whatever the immigrant rights, but they're an immigrant themselves, you know. So I don't know how we keep it where it's open enough. And I'm totally down with not having questions prepared or anything like that. I think that's fine if it's open. Maybe by having topics, that gives an idea of sort of the main things to talk about. I'm done. I'm sorry if this isn't coming through.
No, we heard you.
Yeah, we heard you. One of the things that
Yeah, Director Fisher, go ahead.
Sorry, when we started with Ashley and I, Chair Davis and I think that this was strictly about the search for the police chief and what the community members wanted in a chief of police regarding his skills or her skills, the background and competencies. I think that it sounds as if we are expanding what it is that we want to talk about when we start talking about, particular, if we, I guess what I'm saying is, how do we keep it within our structured time frame, and then of course address the chief search, and then if we're going to expand it, then we need to talk about like maybe changing the time frame and the structure a little bit, because if we are preserving this to present in a report regarding what we think a chief of police should bring to the table and what kind of skills they should have, that's something different than maybe particular issues that a particular group might be facing. So
well, let me actually speak a minute to Jill. So to me, and I don't want to say disappointment, but I think that the survey that the mayor's office is currently doing is probably more narrow than the concerns that were expressed by our community, right? So like some bigger questions about, well, not only what attributes or skills that a police chief might come with, but how are we selecting? Right? Like the community wasn't asked, what process do you think is transparent and fair that, you will have trust in? And are we at a moment that we can actually talk about just having a police chief, but, do we want to do something? Do we want to do it differently here? And are we at a moment where there's enough community will and political will to look at the structure differently? And the questions that the mayor's office is asking, I don't think gets to that. Whereas I think an open forum that we might be able to will get at some of those sort of bigger structures.
that makes sense. That's fine. We just I think that I don't know if it seems like 90 minutes would be enough. I just enough time. We just need to figure out that because that's a logistical thing and how we are presenting and how we're doing. Because you know, sometimes when we're having these meetings, like it will be difficult to just cut it off, right? Because people have so many compelling stories and they get really involved. And so I guess we would definitely need to have a facilitator or a moderator to help, you know, move this along.
Yeah, we might also have to consider an alternative form of collecting information. Want to submit information for their outside of those public forums. Now we can't have absolute free for all, but we could potentially have an additional way of collecting information. So Ashley, I'm interested in hearing from you after having heard some of the things that the commissioners have expressed, like sort of where you are in your thinking now.
No, I mean, to Executive Director's point, I think that certainly works. I would trying to pull up my COB email on my computer here, but I'd like to, at the very least, carve out space and time for more than one type of medium of communication. If it's, you know, if we're saying that we will start with the written responses we get by email and someone reads those out, or we alternate so that we're continuing to hear the conversation publicly. I think that's great. Also, I mean, we do public comment in our COB meetings, and we use the pre-recorded messages ahead of time, and we found a lot of success with that. You know, a lot of folks are maybe not willing to get on at the moment that we have public comment, but they will call a few days ahead of time. And I believe Director Fitchett, a member of her staff, leads and organizes that for us, Ms. Thompson. So perhaps we could set up a line for people to start to come call in, and it's just a matter of, it doesn't make sure they understand de-escalation tactics and have experience in it, or you know, are very well versed in what engaging with the trans community looks like in 2020 and beyond. Because I would probably call in and get on my pulpit and preach, but that's the Ashley and me, not someone else. And I think we should create it space for 30 seconds or up to 2 or 3 minutes. I don't know, but I do think we should maybe put a ceiling to it too. Yeah.
I have a question. Okay, thank you. Do we have any assurance that the information that we're going to gather is going to be used in any meaningful way in the process? I mean, have we been given that from the mayor's office, that, or from HR, or from whomever? Exactly what have they said about that?
I can just share update on my end. So on, I believe it was 2 days, it might have been Friday of last week. John Button gave me a call on a separate matter very quickly, and so I used that space to make him aware that I had communicated to the board a proposal for these community forums, that we had not voted on it and come to terms, but this is the general idea. I didn't go through all the groups with him, but I said that we are looking to make sure that all groups their voices are uplifted there. He was immediately excited about it, wanted even, you know, extended the time to say, you know, if it works, we'd love to have the mayor present as well. I think the mayor's presence is welcomed there, right? If anybody needs to hear it, he does. But I made it very clear this would be a listening space first and foremost, so that the community can be uplifted first there. And so I would take that to believe that there's great purpose here. They want to be engaged, and I shared that with our executive committee that we have an opportunity to share this voice over. I would just echo on my end, and it may just be my timeline. I just didn't want us to wait too long and then the process begin without this important input. But not to say that we need to have all this done by Labor Day, but I at least like to communicate to them what the dates are looking like so that they can keep this in mind, I think.
Yeah, and I think that from conversations that I had both with, well, certainly with Eric Brown and email that John Bunton was also on, there was a clear request for the Metro Human Relations Commission to provide assistance with community engagement. There was no specific ask on how that would look. And at the time, right, I recommended that, well, general, the committee to see what. So didn't necessarily do this as a partnership with the office, but I also didn't get any indication that it was unwelcome.
Well, I know for me, in my conversations with Button and others in the office, at the end of the day, even though we go through whatever process, they make it clear that by law, it's the mayor's choice. And the fact that you hear that over and over again causes me some pause. That while I think this information needs to be gathered, I think it does need to be gathered, particularly from the affected communities who normally are not at the table. But I guess even a larger issue toward the next chief for me is I'd like to know flat out how you're going to ensure public safety and deal with the disproportionate numbers that previous policing has created in this city. I mean, so how do you get questions like that to the table when typically from these affected areas, they come from just their perspective and their point of view, which is all valuable, which all needs to come to the table, to where that the information that is compiled gives a case that if the mayor, because he set up two other committees, one is a selection and one is an interview. And both are huge. It's a whole bunch of people that are part of these two committees, as I understand it. That after HR gets the people who are qualified or whatever, then this selection committee will narrow them down to whatever number that is and present them to the interview committee. And then from there, what comes from the interview committee goes to the mayor, and he makes that choice from there. So I don't know. It just seems to be all of a sudden you got all these moving parts. And again, I think this is a great idea. However it ends up, I'm just worried about the community even being able to have reasonable impact. And I say that because the community asked him over and over to do something with Anderson anyway. That never happened. And it was only when Anderson bucked him on the mask thing that he actually moved on Anderson. So he used his power not for the community, but for himself when he got pissed. So, and I say all that openly because I've shared this in other places that I'm concerned about this process. And I didn't want to create a way in which that at the end of the day, we give others who are waiting to pounce to take hits at these two metro agencies that I believe that have such important work to do, that a significant amount of the voting public place faith in the COB to bring this to fruition. That was a considerable number of white voters also, that was a part of that, and that their voices not be X'd out or even made to seem like that. So I'm gonna do whatever you all tell me to, Ms. Pritchard. But I just saying that I'm gonna hit this mute button again.
Well, this is Mel. I feel fairly confident that we can agree to a process and to a way of communicating our goals to the community that will be respectful of your concerns, Commissioner Tucker. I feel confident that we can do that. Okay, so I do think that time is definitely of the essence here. It is true, we do now have an interim chief, so I'm not entirely sure how that decision has impacted the mayor's own timeline. Just to let you know, Jill and Ms. Fitchard and Chair Davis, our commission had, we'd made the recommendation that there be that there be interim leadership, so that we didn't have to rush as a city to make this decision. So hopefully this will slow down the process enough that we can really hear from the community, we can tabulate what we hear, we can reflect that back to the community, so we can put the kind of pressure that you all want to put on, so that the kinds of questions you care about are asked during interviews, or the process might be able to be amended to reflect what the community might want to see more of. So that, all that being said, next steps. Do we want to come to any final conclusions on what the recommendation will be? If MHRC commissioners, if this needs to be taken back to our commission, I'm not necessarily sure that it does. Go ahead.
Just a couple observations. That one, I don't know, I think maybe 4 minutes is quite a long time. And then you could get more people if you cut that down some. And is there a way that this could be done on the Metro channel? Because I just think that whatever it is we do, it needs to be amplified as loud as possible. And it needs to involve as many people as possible. And so that's why I asked the last question and made the statement about the 4 minutes being probably a bit long if we're trying to get many voices inside of a 90-minute session.
Yeah, I agree. I think 4 minutes is pretty long. I think 2 minutes at the most. I think is it 2 or 3 minutes that council uses?
We usually use 3 minutes, but let's just think about the city council meeting when they had, the fund, the fund campaign. Well, anyway, so I think that those people each had 2 minutes, and it seemed like that 2 minutes was enough for people to have some substantive conversations, and so it seemed like, of course, it took time. They had hundreds of people, but I think that 2 minutes, they prepare in advance. They can say a lot in 2 minutes.
I agree. And this, for your other question, Commissioner Tucker, yes, it can absolutely be simulcast by the Metro Nashville network. It's just a matter of coordinating with them.
'Cause I
It
think
would
that would
also
also,
then be, it would be also recorded too. Go ahead.
and I think that's great. And I think it also gives it another level of legitimacy that not only is it two metro organizations, but it's also on that channel.
Okay, so was there some consensus around dividing it up by topic or being a little more forthright or clear about the communities we're targeting, but then also having some open time for anybody? Was there consensus around that I missed?
And I didn't know, I'm not usually on the raising of hands side of the space. I'm usually calling on folks, so sorry about that. But I thought that we landed on the issue, or at least where I stood, I thought both focusing on the issues, not taking away from those that we highlighted already, but being intentional about sending out communication. In fact, we even said on our side of the space, we were going to ask our board members to send in, individuals, organizations that they wanted to make received an invitation and shared out the flyer to participate as well. But I would hope this language is the city is welcome to lend its voice. We want to hear from you. And here are some issues that we're thinking about, but what else should we be thinking about? Like, I mean, it's open-ended. To Director Fitcher's point, and as inclusive as possible. And maybe that's how we start things off, is that this is intended to be an inclusive conversation. Everyone's voice is equal, even if it's a dissenting opinion. And we get those on our side too.
Yeah, actually, I kind of like the idea of just doing the first one is like, hey, everybody. But then, later ones we could be more targeted in the communities that we're inviting for that particular night.
I think that's good. That sounds good to me.
Okay. All right.
Do you think, I mean, just one counter thought, do you think that perhaps if it is the all-inclusive initial one, that we might diverge down too many paths, or, I mean, too many, or does it matter? Not really.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's probably good. It's probably going to be crazy.
Okay.
But
well, I guess it'll give us the pulse for the to see perhaps if we need to have, maybe there might be other meetings that we might need to consider if we find issues that are not represented through the other issue forums that we've set out. So okay, fair enough.
Actually, that's a very good point, Commissioner Rodriguez, right? That community knows what they want. And so by our listening, you're absolutely right. We might hear things that first night that we aren't even considering right this minute.
Makes the first meeting the best because it helps us to frame if we need to add an extra meeting, right? So if we wait to the end to do that, we would have missed out an opportunity. So yeah, I think it's best
Right.
to have the crazy meeting. No, I'm just kidding. The open meeting initially, just in case we needed to, like I said, add a fifth meeting or something, or extend
Right.
the time for those other meetings.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, well, I feel fairly confident that now we have a roadmap. The commissioners and board members who are on this call are lucky enough to have to deal with the logistics of making this work. That's why you pay your brilliant directors.
Big money.
So,
One question, Mel.
of course.
Out of these individuals who are making comments, is there going to be some effort on our part to gather any type of data as it relates to who's talking or any of that, or is the goal to just record their responses? And I know that even though we have these potential categories for particular nights, is there any type of running tally, or how would you even do that, or is that not even part of this?
Well, I would like Peter Valier to jump in and see what he has to say in regards to that. Dr. Valier, can you tell us if you would be able to do something like that, or if it is too much?
Yeah, I think it's possible to collect some of that information, especially if people are signing up beforehand. We can ask that folks fill out a quick brief bit of demographic information about themselves if they feel comfortable, and make it optional. That's something that can be done, especially if people are signing up beforehand. I think especially over video chat, if people don't have access to, it becomes a problem if we're assuming people's demographics and trying to code them and trying to collect that information on our own, especially when there might be some access differences to online services. So that is something that we could send out a brief survey if people are registering beforehand. I think that's doable.
Okay.
In our experience has been in collecting demographic data, right? If you are transparent about the reason you're asking for it, which in our case is that, we want to, we want to be as equitable as we can. We want to ensure that the voices that we're hearing from are truly reflective of the whole community. So, and I think that people are often more willing to give that information when they understand why we want it. Okay, so given that we have a good outline and a path forward, we don't have specific dates. And I think that determining dates will probably require that we communicate with IT and MNN, right, to ensure that it can in fact be staffed on the evenings that we want it. And I think if there are multiple members of our boards or commissions who are logging in, I know that technically that could mean it's subject to open meetings, but given that we're doing a public meeting, I think that would we would be able to do anything we needed to do to satisfy the open meetings law.
Email that we have to determine is if, in fact, the governor is going to extend the executive order for public meetings. Which I hope, I don't know if that will affect us. It might, especially since we don't know for certain. I think it ends August the 29th at this point. So I just wanted to bring that up.
No, that's a very fair point. So I think another option, which I've actually already had an opportunity to talk to our legal counsel, Derek Smith, for a moment about, is if multiple commissioners or multiple board members are logged in just to listen, but not to participate in conversation, right? So there's no deliberation, but it's pure listening. It's likely that doesn't trigger the open meetings law, right? Requiring us to comply with the logistics, but Derek is looking at that for us. Okay, so if there isn't anything else, I think I'm happy to follow up. My team and Jill's team follow up together and solidify the plans and for us to divide the responsibilities, or how we're going to delegate out what needs to be done to make this happen.
And I think another thing that we need to figure out before we hang up is the messaging for the media release, right? Like I mean, of course it's going to be this partnership, but I don't know if it should come from the chair. Should it come from, both chairs? I don't know how we should do it. So I'm gonna let you guys work on that, and whatever you decide, I'm cool with. Chair Davis, you got some suggestions?
Have a collaborative press release and messaging. There's no need to have two separate comms pieces there. I think we just put together.
Yeah, and I am, and I think Marissa, are you still on the call with us?
Yes,
Chair?
I'm absolutely here.
Great. And thank you for joining us, even though you weren't even on this committee. I love how committed you are to our broader cause, so thank you. And so if you're okay with it, then I would think that it would be good to send out to message it from the two chairs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead and put my name on it.
Okay, great. Plus, you guys are La Famosas in town, so people listen to what you two have to say. Okay, well, if there is nothing else, then I can say that Jill, her team and my team will get together and we will send to our respective committees as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, Janice, if you want to close us out.
Okay, do we need a motion to adjourn? Let's make one.
So moved.
Okay, second? I second it. All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Good seeing everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Very good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.